are formally inclined, I am not Mrs. Gabaldon. People keep calling me that. Gabaldon is my own name. My married name is Watkins, so if you have to call me Mrs. anything, it's Mrs. Watkins. But most people just call me Diana. It's a little easier. Okay. If I have the USA page open anywhere, can I shut it off? I don't know that I do, but let me have a quick look. Not that one. Not that one. No. Not that one. Not that one. Not that one, I hope. No, not that one. Oh, page translator, sumo toad. No, not that one. Okay, back the other way. Chat live, that's probably it. There it goes. All right. Okay, are we looking a little better now? Okay, good. All right, so are we live? Are we on? Okay, it looks as though we have a few questions up already. Brandy asks, which parts of the Outlander book series characters do you feel have been best captured and least well captured in the TV version of the series? Well, it's hard to say because the actors are splendid. They do such a good job of embodying the characters. At the same time, of course, they are not the same characters that they are in the book, mostly because of the logistics of filming. For instance, I have occasionally heard people say, well, Katrina is wonderful as Claire, which she is, but, somehow I miss, the humorous, sassy, sarcastic Claire that we're used to from the books. Well, it isn't that Katrina is lacking in any of those qualities, but it is the case that those qualities of Claire come across most strongly in the book because you're hearing what she's thinking. You are inside Claire's head because all of her parts of the story are first-person narrative, and so you know what she's thinking and how she's responding to anything she sees, and that's why you think she's sarcastic and humorous, because she is, but she is usually smart enough not to let all of that out. So anyway, Katrina is a wonderful Claire, but show Claire is going to be, noticeably different than book Claire. This doesn't mean it's best or least, it's just different. Okay, and, Janet asks, were one or both of Claire's parents time travelers, and did they really die in a car accident? Well, given that we are reasonably sure that time travel is a genetic thing, one or both of her parents had to have been time travelers. Now, I gather what you're thinking is, were they time travelers and they just set it up to look like they died in a car accident so they could what? Go off and abandon their child? And nobody would ever find out? You don't have to be a time traveler to do that if you're so inclined. No. I mean, whoever Claire thought were her parents did die in a car accident. The reason I say that is because I was reading this question earlier, and it's been asked several times, and suddenly it occurred to me. I said, well, of course her parents were time travelers. What if the people who died in the car accident weren't her parents, and her parents, for reasons unknown to me, them, or anyone else, did in fact decided to abandon their child and went off time traveling somewhere else? Well, that kind of leaves all kinds of things open, doesn't it? Let's see, and Candida asks, what has been your favorite part about the adaptation process? Let's see, what about the production process? Oh, now we're live? Have we not been live so far? Well, we hope that we have been. Anyway, Janet asks, let's see, we are live, okay. Wait. Okay, I'm getting mixed messages here. Okay, Stephen asks, is there any other place or time in history where you would want to find yourself as a time traveler? No, there really isn't. I think time traveling is a really dangerous thing to do, and there are really not many parts of the past that I would want to visit personally. I find them fascinating from a research point of view, but most of them would be really inconvenient to live in. So basically, no. Let me see, and I was about to answer Candida's question. What has been your favorite part about the adaptation process? And what about the production process? Okay, both excellent questions. Well, the adaptation process is a deeply collaborative one on this show, possibly on most of them. There is, as you've probably heard, a writer's room where all four of the staff writers, and Ron and Meryl, when available, all come together and discuss what's going to be in the various episodes. They decide how to break the book, and when they say break the book, that's exactly what they mean. They take the book apart into all of its component scenes, sub-scenes, quarter scenes, half scenes, and they take out all of the dialogue and put it in a separate table down one side of their chalkboard so that they can pull out lines as needed. And then they go through and say, well, if the first episode starts here, is that a good place for it to start? Well, maybe not, because it moves kind of slowly. Maybe we could do this instead first and then bring that in. Or, and how is this going to end? Because it has to end on a note that will make people want to tune in next week. And so we've only got 55 minutes. How far can we get? Well, this is getting us to an awkward place. So let's move this to the next one, and we'll put in this little piece as an ending. For instance, in the first episode of Season 1, the episode ends with Claire and the Highlanders coming up to the unknown environment of Castle Leoch, which is, it's certainly in the book, but it's a fairly minor thing. But it is a really good place to end a TV episode. So just seeing how that was done and being able to participate in it to some degree was a lot of fun, sort of like playing jigsaw puzzles with friends. And as far as the production process, that was very grueling. I got to be on set for about 4 weeks during the prep and shooting of the block that my episode was in. I wrote one of the episodes for Season 2. It was episode 11 out of 13. It's the one called Vengeance is Mine, which is a quote from the book. And if you remember that quote, then you'll know more or less what's happening in that episode. One of the most interesting things was actually before they began shooting, there's a process called tech recce, which is technical reconnaissance. And that means that all of the crew chiefs and their assistants and the writers and the director and the assistant director and the producer get an enormous bus and go and visit the locations on which the coming block is going to be shot. And the first thing you do is open the script when you get to those locations and say, okay, what's the first scene that happens here? And then you decide, how are you going to use this location? How do its fittings and aspects fit into the scene that you intend to shoot here? For instance, in one case, we entered this very stately home, huge hall that we were in with a hearth at one end and 2 doors, plus the front door. And the assistant director, whose job this is, opened his script and said, well, the first scene is, and I'm paraphrasing here, is where so-and-so comes in, and she's headed for the front door, and she's interrupted when the evil servant comes in, and then, this happens out here, and so forth. And he said, so the first question, turning to the director, is, which door do you want Mary to come in? The director looks around the room and says, well, I want a fire in that hearth there, so she'd better come in through that door. Immediately, 3 people leap out of the crowd and head for the hearth. One to measure it, one to look up the chimney and be sure it's clear, and another to see where to lay the gas line, because they use gas fires for all of the flame that you see, because these are controllable, and you can control the height of the flame and not set things on fire, and also you don't want your fire suddenly to go out in the middle of an episode. This turned out to be very helpful, especially in the episodes that were shot outdoors in the pouring rain with campfires. An interesting thing about production is that it can be just bucketing down and it doesn't show on film. You can see that the characters are somewhat wet, so you assume there's a drizzle at least, but in fact there's probably a major rainstorm going on, but it just does not register on the screen, or else the editing is so good that they kind of take it out. But I've been present on some occasions where it was just raining like cats and dogs, and didn't show at all on the screen. So anyway, it was just fascinating seeing how the logistics work. As for the actual shooting, that involves standing more or less in one place for 12 to 14 hours a day, watching intently and concentrating every minute. So as I say, it's a very grueling process, and I'm surprised that it hasn't killed any of the actors or the production crew yet. But they're very stoic. Okay, Rose asks, if you could bring forward into our time any of the characters from 1743, which one would you choose? I would bring Fergus. I don't know, I think I might be tempted to bring Lord John Grey, just because he tends to be very witty and a good conversationalist. All right, Linda asks, your writing is so detailed, it makes the reader feel like they have become part of the story. Do the characters chat with you even after their story has been somewhat told? Well, it's not so much that the characters talk with me, it's that I can see them and I can hear what they say. I believe someone in an earlier preview question had asked me, is there any one of the characters in your book that you would want to be? Which the answer is, I'm all of them already, they don't have to choose. So, I can hear people say things. Sometimes it's someone that I'm deeply inside of, sometimes I'm inside someone who's talking to someone else, and then I hear them from the outside. But in answer to the basic question, yeah, often they'll tell me things, or I will see things about them. I will see bits of story that were not in the main storyline. Some of these are incorporated, like ex post facto. Others form the kernels for what I call bulges, which are these little novellas that kind of fit into the lacunae of the main storylines. I think there's 7 or 8 of these novellas now. Actually, there's 11 all told, or there will be. I'm working on 2 at the moment. Later this year or early next year, there will be a book out. In the U.S., it will have 7 of the novellas, which will be, well, the new ones will be Virgins, and a story about Minnie and Hal and their courtship, Hal being Lord John's elder brother. And the third one is another Lord John novella, which I think has to do with the siege of Havana, but I haven't quite started on that one yet, so I'm not for sure. Anyway, Melanie asks, with all the travel you've been doing of late, how do you find the time to focus on book 9? The book just kind of travels with me. It's always in my head. And regardless what I'm doing, as long as I'm not, physically engaged in something that demands my attention, it's always kind of there. And often we'll be driving, my husband and I, and he'll look at me and he'll say, "You have that look on your face again." He said, "You're writing, aren't you?" I'll say, "Yes." I may have been in the middle of a conversation, and something he said just triggered something, and suddenly I saw how a piece would fit into what I was writing, and I just went there. So it's always with me. So anytime the opportunity allows, I can write, and I do. Even when traveling, I will write on airplanes and in airports, and I have twice finished a book while on an airplane, and luckily Wi-Fi on airplanes had happened by then, so I was able to title my email to my editor, "To you from 30,000 feet," the thrilling conclusion of Echo in the Bone. And yeah, I can write anywhere. During the filming of episode 11, I actually worked on the book during the intervals between takes on set, because there we were indoors. We had 5 days of indoor shooting. The rest of it was all outdoors. And of course you can't work while you're standing in a rainstorm. But sitting down inside with a laptop on your lap, why not? They do take after take after take, as you doubtless know. But when a take is finished, then they have to rearrange the cameras for the next one. And so there's usually a lag of 15 to 20 minutes between takes while they do that. And occasionally the director will shout, or the assistant director will shout, "Turning around," by which they mean they are actually moving all the cameras to the other side of the set. And in that case, you have a good 45 minutes, and the actors can all fly off to their trailers, and you can go get a toastie from the craft services, which is nice. Right. Christiane asks, you've written about many places, including Scotland, France, the Caribbean, the Carolinas, Saratoga. What other locations are you interested in writing about, and will we see any of those in future books? Well, if I were interested in them, yes, you certainly would see them in future books. But as to what they may be, I can't tell you. I don't plan the books ahead of time, and I don't actually plan them while I'm working on them. I begin to write in bits and pieces where I can see something happening. Now, often the location is dictated by the way the last book ended. In other words, I have to pick up these people. Am I going to continue their story from the location where they are, or am I going to move them to a location where I know something is happening in the new book? And often you do move between books, and you just announce at the head of the book, well, now we're in North Carolina, on Mount Helicon or something like that. And the reader is perfectly happy to make that jump. They don't really care how they got from the end of the last book to the new location. But when you're in the middle of a book, you can do that too, but you have to provide a little more of a bridge explaining why they went there and all that. And that's one of the last things that I do, is to write bridges between the little pieces that I'm fitting together. So I'll just work on a scene where I have what I call a kernel. A kernel is a very vivid image, line of dialogue, an emotional ambiance, anything that I can see or sense concretely. And I will then write a line or two describing whatever that is as closely as I can and as clearly as I can. And then I sit there and I stare at it, and I take words out and I put words back, and I move clauses, and I think, no, that was right or the other way. And I'll change things, all the time. And while the top of my mind is consciously engaged in the craft of this, making that sentence as elegant and pretty as it can be, and as clear as it can be, The back of my mind is kicking up questions. What time of day is it? How is the light falling? Who else is in the room? It's a cold day. It's winter. I can tell from the light. Is the room cold? Yes, it is. My fingers are cold, and so is my nose. But my feet are warm. There must be a fire. Where is it? Oh, it's over there. Oh, there's a dog by the fire. I've never seen him before. Anyway, that sort of thing. So all this kind of random stuff just kind of bubbles up constantly, and I kind of sift through it and pick pieces out that fit. And all the time, the top of my mind is occupied with the craft. The pacing here. This paragraph is too long. I should break it here. If I do break it here, well, now then someone should say something there, because there's a pattern to paragraphs on a page. You can actually tell from opening a book what the pacing is like. If you open, say, one of Janet Ivanovich's Stephanie Plum novels, you'll see that no paragraph is more than 4 lines long. And it's peppered with dialogue back and forth. If you open Ken Follett's Pillars of the Earth, you will see these big blocks of research details, and in between those are briefer lines which actually outline the story. So if you don't really want to know how to build a 14th century cathedral, just read the short paragraphs and you'll get all of the story, no problem. This is no knock on Ken Follett, it's just the way he writes. And for those people who are very interested in the research, then it's right there for them. And for those people who are less interested, it's easy to follow. Anyway, Dee asks, will you have another cameo appearance in season 2 of the Star series? No, I will not. I wrote a script, and I think that's enough. Melanie asks, how did you come up with the phrase Jesus H. Roosevelt Christ for Claire? I actually picked it up from some of the research on World War II. After I realized that that's where she had come from, and I knew she was English, because that's what I started with, then I realized she must have been a British combat nurse. And I was thinking, well, this was my first book, Outlander, and I was thinking, well, just in case I am not perfect in the British slang and dialogue of the period and so forth, maybe I had better have her in a situation where she's been in close proximity with American soldiers, and she will have picked up various bits and pieces from them. So if there's a slip in the slang, then it can be attributable to her experience rather than my inexperience. So anyway, I did pick up Jesus H. Roosevelt Christ from something that I had been reading about World War II. I can't remember whether it was a novel or someone's memoir, but it was in fact an authentic bit of slang from the period. Right. Carrie asks, your characters live and participate in actual historical events. Were you a lover of history before writing your books? Well, not professionally, you might say. I went through the entire set of biographies that the public library had when I was young, and I was fascinated by all of those. But I was equally fascinated with every other book in that library, so I can't say that it was a particular passion of mine. As for actual expertise, I have 6 hours of Western civilization that they make you take as an undergraduate. So that's why when I was deciding what to write, and I thought I'd write a historical novel, my main reason for thinking that was that I was a research professor. I said historical novels depend on, accuracy and detail and so forth. I know how to do that. I have a library at my disposal, the university library, which is very large. So I said it seems easier to look things up, which I know how to do, rather than make them up, which I wasn't sure I could do. And I said if I turn out to have no imagination, I can steal things from the historical record. So that's why I decided on historical fiction. Thereafter, of course, the question was, well, which historical period are you going to use? Because I had no pull toward any particular one. Any time would do as well as another. I'd have to look it all up anyway. So I was looking for a time and place in which to set this novel, and I happened to see, as many of you know, an old Doctor Who rerun. Well, this was one of the old Patrick Troughton shows. It has to have been filmed, 60 years ago, at least. Anyway, for those who are not familiar with Doctor Who, the Doctor of the title is a Time Lord who travels through space and time in his TARDIS and has adventures through different periods of Earth's history, where he picks up companions. Well, in this very old show, he had picked up a young Scotsman from 1745, and this was a young man named Jamie McCrimmon, who appeared in his kilt. And I said, well, it's kind of fetching. Anyway, I found myself still thinking about this the next day in church, and I don't claim divine revelation, but I was in church. And I said, well, you want to write a book. It doesn't really matter where you do it. The important thing is pick a point, get started. I said, fine, Scotland, 18th century, why not? So that's where I began, knowing nothing about Scotland or the 18th century, having no plot, no outline, and no characters, nothing but the rather vague images conjured up by the notion of a man in a kilt, which is, as you'll admit, a very powerful and compelling image. In fact, a few years later, when I was on a book tour in Germany, I had luckily won the Corina International Prize for Fiction, which was very cool. I got to go and accept it on Bavarian television. But while I was in Germany, the German publisher took the opportunity to have me interviewed by everybody in the entire German press. So for an entire week, I was interviewed every 30 minutes by a different journalist. Toward the end of this process, I was talking to a nice man from a literary journal. And he said, "Oh, I've read all of your books. They're tremendous. Your narrative drive is terrific. Your characters, they're just so 3D." And I'm thinking, yes, go on. Instead, he stopped and said, "There's just this one thing. I wonder, could you explain to me what is the appeal of a man in a kilt?" And I stopped for a minute. I was really tired, or I might not have said it, but I just looked at him and I said, "Well, I suppose it's the idea that you could be up against a wall with him in a minute." Anyway, home again 3 weeks later, I got a pile of press clippings from this junket, including that one. I recognized the man's name. Now, they were all in German, and I can read German, but very slowly. But the publisher had put a Post-it note on top of this particular interview. She said, "I don't know what you told this man, but I think he is in love with you." So, very powerful and compelling image, as I say. Anyway, Sherry asks, "Do you have plans for Fergus or any of his children to time travel? Are they related to Claire?" Well, we have no idea whether they're related to Claire, nor yet do we know whether they're time travelers. If he's not related to them, it kind of lowers the probability. But even if he is related to Claire, it doesn't necessarily mean that he's a time traveler. Because, as I say, it's genetic. Presumably you could time travel if you have only one allele that controls time travel, which Brianna has. Jamie's not a time traveler, but she's doing fine. Let's see, pop-ups, go away. And other people may or may not have two. Probably Jemmy and Mandy have two, one gene from Roger and another from Brianna, and that may have something to do with their ability to sense each other. On the other hand, maybe, there's just the sort of thing that you have between siblings who are very close to each other. Twins often are very sensitive to each other, and sometimes, just children who are very fond of each other and to know each other. They'll make up their own languages, and the communication between them is often, nonverbal. I can communicate with my own sister non-verbally, a quick glance, and we know exactly what each other is thinking. Now, whether we can do it telepathically, I don't know, but, it may have something to do with the time travel gene. Anyway, let me see. Barbara asks, "What and or when did the inspiration of entering the stones occur to you?" Well, that was fairly early on, but not for a while. See, the first thing to begin with was that all I had was a man in a kilt, and so the first couple of scenes that I'd written were just dealing with this man in a kilt, and it was just an effort to put fiction on the screen rather than nonfiction, which I'd written for a number of years. And so the first scene I wrote was just a scene with my man in a kilt having an argument with his sister who was chopping vegetables. It wasn't about anything. I got about half a page and ran out of inspiration, but that's where I started. At the same time, I was doing research on Scotland in the 18th century, and I was looking for conflict, because that's the best thing that I knew about writing novels, was that they should have conflict. So I'm looking for conflict in Scotland in the 18th century. You don't do that for very long without running into Bonnie Prince Charlie and the Jacobite Rebellion. I said, well, that looks like plenty of conflict. Fine, we'll do that. And then I started thinking, well, on my basis of my 3 days research, this looks like the Scots versus the English. So I must have a lot of Scotsmen because of the kilt factor. But I think it would be a good idea if I had a female character to play off these guys. They'll have sexual tension, that's good. And that's conflict. And I said, well, Scots versus English, if I make her an English woman, we will have lots of conflict. So about the 3rd day of writing, I introduced this English woman. No idea who she was, what she was doing there, how she got in the plot. But I loosed her into a cottage full of Scotsmen to see what she'd do. Well, they were all muttering to each other around the fire, and when she came in, they turned around and stared. I'm thinking, well, why was wrong with her? Does she look funny? Anyway, one of them drew himself up, and he said, "My name's Dougal Mackenzie, and who might you be?" And without my stopping to think, I just typed, "My name's Claire Elizabeth Beecham, and who the hell are you?" And I said, well, you don't sound at all like a historical person. So I fought with her for several pages, trying to beat her into shape and make her talk like an 18th century person. But she wasn't having any of this. She just kept making smart-ass modern remarks. And she also took over and started telling the story herself. So I said, well, okay, I'm not going to fight with you all the way through this book. I said, no one's ever going to see it. It doesn't matter what bizarre thing I do. Go ahead and be modern. I'll figure out how you got there later. So it's all her fault that there was time travel. But having made that rather whimsical decision, I then had to figure out who she was and where she came from. So I started thinking about it, because she could have been anybody from anywhere. And I said, well, you know, if I were going to be a time traveler and go to the 18th century, presumably from the future, what kind of skills would I like to have? And I thought, well, I think I'd like to be something in the medical line, have a better chance of staying alive and or protecting the people who are dear to me. So I said, okay, should she be a doctor? And then I'm thinking, no, that doesn't seem right. And I think, but maybe. And I'm thinking, well, you know, modern medicine moves so quickly and is so technological. I really didn't want to have someone who would be looking at a wounded man on the battlefield and thinking, oh my God, I wish I could put this man in an MRI scanner. I wanted someone who could fall to her knees and start stanching the blood and stitching him back together. And so I said, okay, you didn't come from the present day. You came from some time when medicine was cruder, was more hands-on, much less technical tools to it. And I said, okay, and where would that be, I wonder? Because I also wanted to have empathy between her and the reader, as in sharing an appreciation for what modern medicine is. And that means she would need to be familiar with antisepsis, antibiotics, and anesthesia. Those are the three great pillars of modern medicine. All three of them were known in the late 19th century, but all three of them came into common use and common knowledge during World War II. They were all in use in the battlefields. So I said, okay, that's where you came from, World War II. And immediately she sprang into 3D life. I said, you're a World War II combat nurse. And instantly I knew who she was. And because those were tough ladies. People always say to me, oh, you write such strong women. And I'm thinking, well, A, I don't like stupid women. Why would I write about one? But more than that, if you ever read anything about World War II combat nurses, they were nothing but. These were very ferocious, determined women. And let's see, so anyway, that's where she came from. Oh, we were actually asking about the stones. Well, that was the problem, was how was she going to get into the past? And I was thinking about ways and means of doing this, and I was doing the research along as I do it concurrently with the writing. And I kept turning up mentions of stone circles all through Scotland and northern Britain. These are all over the British Isles. And so I saw enough of them. Every time they would describe the circle in great detail. Every description ended up, but no one actually knows the reason for the stone circles. They'd speculate, was it an observatory, was it a sacrificial place? And I started thinking, well, you know, I bet I could think of a reason. And so that's where they came from. They just kept showing up in the research, and finally it occurred to me that that would be a really good way to time travel. Okay, let's see. Rosaline asks, I have read all 8 books several times, thank you very much, and still will sometimes get mixed up when I am looking for a particular event. For instance, when Brianna has her first child. Even though you are the author, do you have any issues with this? Yes, periodically. Now, the major events, I know you know, the sequence in which they happened, and I know which book they happened in, and I can usually find them fairly quickly. What I am not good at is how old people are. You know, I know when they were born, but, you know, I just never care about how old they are. I have a rough approximation, and this is actually a problem when I run into some place where I have to actually describe their age. Luckily, in my position, I now have, I have you guys. I have a huge fan base of really determined nitpickers, and so whenever I run into something like that, I will just post a quick message on CompuServe or Facebook saying, hey, does anybody happen to know how old Jemmy is at the end of Book 7? And immediately all the answers will come back, and so that takes care of a lot of those little problems for me. B asks, I've read books 1 and 2, started book 3, and there seems to be quite a bit of rape, in quotation marks. Did your research conclude this to be true frequent events of those times, or is it more of your style of creating stories? Well, we don't actually have any statistics from then, so it would be impossible to say. It's reasonable to assume that it happened fairly frequently, especially in places where there was less formal law than there is in modern cities, for instance. I don't know what the actual statistics are, the actual occurrence, because people believe rape to be underreported, you know, for obvious reasons. It's very emotionally distressing to have to do that. But I think the latest statistic I saw was an estimation that 1 out of 4 women is raped sometime in her life. That's a lot of women, you know. So I don't think I am overstating the case in terms of actual event, but it's not so much an attempt at historical accuracy that causes me to do that. There's a lot of historical accuracy in these books without that. No, what it is this is one of the underlying themes of the book, is what sex is. And what sex is communication. we tend to think of it in its positive form, where you have lovers having sex and so forth. But there is also very negative forms between people who are or used to be lovers, and between strangers for that matter. Sometimes sex between strangers can be tender and wonderful. Quite often it is a matter of, assault and domination and, actual maiming or harmful stuff. But it is a way of looking at the deeper emotion and of looking at the deep end for a reason. It isn't so much about the rape, it's about what happens to the people afterward. How do they recover from this? How do they become who they were, or how do they become a new and stronger version of who they are? I never like to hear people who have been assaulted, who have suffered rape, to be described as victims, because this seems to further victimize them as, oh, this terrible thing has happened to you, so now you're permanently wounded, you're crippled, oh, this is awful. And that's not actually the case. Yes, it is a terrible thing to happen, but a lot of people survive this. A lot of people put their lives back together, and they go on in different forms sometimes. Often there is recurrent echoes. How could it not be that way? And yet, it is a part of life, and they handle it. And so that's kind of why I do it, is showing the various ways in which people respond, not only to that, but to various other horrible things that happen. There's a lot of conflict in these books, not just that by any means. There's death, there's maiming. What do you do after you've lost a hand or a leg or something like that? What does that do to you? You can see Jamie's fear of it in the earlier times, and then finally when he asks Claire to amputate his finger and sends it on with his brother, who's a brother-in-law who's about to die. But you see all of these ways that people are coping, essentially. Now, I have never gotten a letter from someone who'd suffered rape saying, this is terrible, why did you do this? This brings back all kinds of horrible memories for me, I can't stand it, this is awful. Never, not once. I have had dozens, maybe hundreds, dozens of letters from people in the same situation who have said to me, your book gave me hope. You have to forgive me, I mush up easily. Anyway, Susan asks, television shows have to be edited for time, and therefore no scenes were cut to fit the 1-hour format. For season 1, was there any part of the book that was not included in the TV show that you wish was included? Well, yeah, lots of them. Yeah, it's a big book. They all are. And in a book, I have plenty of room to do anything I want to at any length I want to. They're very constrained, not only by the fact that they had only 16 hours, but by the fact that it was a television show, meaning that those 16 hours were, in fact, 55-minute segments, which were separated by a week. That means that each episode kind of had to have its own little arc that started here and rose and came down in a satisfactory place that would make people tune in the next week. So the show is composed of these little arcs like that, and the whole season comprises a much larger arc to which all these smaller ones contribute. Now the book is actually shaped like that. It's got 3 pyramids, and it's got a lot more stuff in it. They had to, that's why they take the books apart and reassemble them, is because the structure of the book does not lend itself to 55-minute episodes, and so they have to take those pieces and kind of refit them, and this is also why they leave some things out, and they include some other novel things that they have to write to get from point A to point B. They might say, well, we want this, this, and this in this episode, but how are we going to get from here to here? We'll have to write something. And I don't mind that at all. I actually enjoy seeing these new little pieces. It gives me a sense of novelty and discovery whenever I'm watching it. So that's not a problem. But, there are things that I miss. For instance, the grotto scene at the end. And, in fact, the whole sequence at the end at the Abbey where Claire saves Jamie's soul. They could not do that in the show because there just was not time to do the psychological development necessary for that. That would have taken an entire separate episode to deal with. And as Ron said to me, I can't possibly build a grotto for the 2 or 3 minutes that scene would take. He said, bar the expense, there's all these kinds of safety issues when you put actors in water for very long. So that's why you didn't get the grotto scene, unfortunately. But, I understand why. Whenever I have an issue with something in a script or in the footage that I've seen, I'll talk to Meryl and Ron about it, and I'll just tell them. And and as diplomatically as I can most of the time. And they will, 9 times out of 10, they'll address the issue. They'll do something about it. They may not change things in a way I suggested, but they'll do something about it. And the 9th or the 10th time, they'll just explain to me why they can't, and I'll go, yeah, okay, I see that. So we get along very well together, and I understand why they do what they do. Okay. Sorry. Blythe asks, Lord John Grey is such an in-depth character. At what point did you realize he was going to become this major person in Jamie's life? It was actually when I came to write Voyager. We had seen him very briefly in Dragonfly and Amber. He just popped up out of the scenery, and I thought that was it. But when I was thinking about Voyager, I knew Jamie was in prison, and I was thinking, what was prison like for him? Well, it's going to be affected quite a lot by who is in charge. This is the person that he's going to be dealing with whom he may have conflict and so forth. And I was thinking conflict, and then it just sort of came together. And I was saying, and that's when I realized, that Lord John Grey was gay as well, because I said, what about this kid who had, when last seen, threatened to kill him, said, as soon as my debt to you is discharged, I'm going to kill you. Okay, well, the debt has been discharged by his elder brother rescuing Jamie at the beginning of Voyager, so I thought, okay, his debt's discharged, what's he going to do? He's the governor of the prison. He can't kill him, in honor. It's his job to run the prison, keep the prisoners in good shape. He can't. At the same time, he really, really wants to. And I was saying, but what about Jamie? Would he care about this? Well, he would if he realized, that this man who has power over him and who he recognizes, but doesn't say anything, has also got sexual inclinations for him, and yet he doesn't do anything until Lord John, makes the mistake of laying a hand on his, at which Jamie remarks very softly, "Take your hand off me, or I will kill you." And I thought, okay, there we go. And so with that in mind, it was obvious that Lord John had a lot to do with Jamie, because I understood Lord John quite well at this point. He is, a very honorable, interesting person. He's got a lot of depth and character. And you get 2 people of that frame of mind, or 3 if we count Claire, and you've really got something. Okay, Prince and Hawthorne, both of you, ask, really loved how you incorporated the nursing and later medical skills in your series. How important was it to you for your medical descriptions to be accurate, and how much time did you put into the research? Oh, it's very important. You can't do something convincing like that if you're just making it up. And the thing is that medical procedures are very, very easy to research. You can find out anything online these days. And even when I began writing in 1988, there's an immense amount of stuff in print. The internet did not exist as we now know it in 1988. So Outlander was written entirely from library. Did not exist as we now know it in 1988. So Outlander was written entirely from library research. But it's not at all hard to find that out or to be accurate about it. Now, if I'm writing something complicated, these days I count a number of doctors amongst my readers and acquaintance, and so I will ask one of them. I'll say, look, I have this thing with Lord John's eye, for instance. I had a doctor friend, and I said, would you look at it and see if what Claire is doing there looks all right? And she read it, and she said, well, I think it does. She said, but it's a specialist field. I have a friend who's an ophthalmologist. Let me have him read it. And so he did, and luckily he liked it too. He suggested a couple of improvements to the scene which I put in, and he didn't want to be acknowledged, which is why he's not in the acknowledgement, but the woman who introduced us is. So yeah, it is important. As to how much time you put into the research, I have no idea. I do the research concurrently with the writing, and so on a regular day when I'm home, not traveling and so forth, I'll try to research for an hour or so. It may just be browsing through my various books. It may be, if I have a specific book, I may be working on a battle that has a lot of detail to it. I will read that book very carefully, and stick in post-it notes at strategic spots where I need to go back and check the name or an event or the timing or something. But this just goes on all the time that I'm writing. There's always new stuff you could find out. So you've never done enough research. It's just, have you done enough to write down what you need to write down here? Okay, and Marilyn asks, who are your favorite authors and who inspired you to write at all? Well, I learned to read at the age of 3, and I'm 64 now, so I have literally dozens of favorite authors. Rather than tell you a few of them, I might just direct you to my website, which is www.dianagabaldon.com, and that has, under the Resources tab, a feature called the Methadone List, and this is for people who write to me asking, what am I supposed to read while I'm waiting for your next novel to come out? And what it is a listing of books that I personally like very much, my favorite authors, a lot of them, not all of them by any stretch of the imagination, but a number of them from a variety of genres, and I can guarantee that any book on that list has engaging characters, a really good plot, and good grammar. So that would be a good place to go and look. As for who inspired me to write, well, no one really. I just knew from the age of 8 or so that I was supposed to be a novelist. I just didn't know how. Okay, and Diane asks, what is your favorite thing to do when you are not writing? Read, actually. I was about to say, private things involving my husband, but no, he wouldn't like that. And read is basically the answer there. Lauren asks, has anything you have experienced on set influenced future books? Yeah, just one thing that I can think of. I'm sure there are more. These things just kind of boil around in your subconscious. But there was one day on set where we were filming out in the yard at Lollybrock, and of course it was take after take after take. It was a really cold day. The wind was blowing, and after every take, the costume people rush up with these big down coats and envelop the actors in them. Anyway, I just called to cut, and everybody stopped for a minute. Sam Hewen was standing next to his horse. Anyway, the horse peed on him while he was standing there waiting for his coat. So I think that might make it into a future book at some point. Let's see. Margaret asks, what has writing novels taught you about yourself? I don't really know that writing novels has taught me anything about myself. It's more that I learn things about myself as I grow older, and then I use those things when I'm writing. Sometimes I don't realize that I know something until I have written it down, but it's not that the act of writing taught it to me. It was there. It just, I became able to articulate it because I had written it, is about what it comes down to. Kay asks, I know you write in pieces, sections, and then weave them together as you go. That's true. Have you ever had a piece that just didn't fit? What then? Do you hang on to it to see if it can be used in another book at some point? Yeah, that's exactly what I do. Whenever I have a piece that doesn't fit, and it doesn't happen very often, I think maybe 4 times in the course of these 8 enormous books, usually it's a scene that belongs in the next book, and I think in all those cases, that's what I've done with it, is just pushed it along. Now, for instance, that chunk of Echo in the Bone that's at Saratoga, where Claire is finding Jamie wounded on the battlefield and then amputates his finger. I wrote those a good 10 years before I wrote Echo in the Bone, as I knew I was going to deal with the Battle of Saratoga at some point, and I had thought it might be in Voyager, and of course we got nowhere near it. So anyway, I just held on to those because I knew we were coming to the Battle of Saratoga sooner or later, and eventually there it was. So those scenes are pretty much just as I wrote them. They didn't need to be changed at all. I just plugged them in. Okay, and Mike says, I love your short stories. Thank you very much. Can you tell us anything about Virgins? Well, yes, I can. Actually, Virgins comes out tomorrow as an ebook in the UK, the US, and Canada. No, I'm afraid it isn't coming out in any of the other places that I know of yet, and it is only as an ebook for the time being. It will be included in a collection of novellas that's coming out later this year or perhaps early next year. But what Virgins is the story of Jamie Fraser, age 19, and his best friend Ian, age 20, as young French mercenaries. That is, it's set in 1740. prior to when Outlander begins. And this is after Jamie has been flogged at Fort William and after his father has died, and Murtaugh and Dougal have managed to get him out of the fort, and Murtaugh has brought him to France and basically confided him to Ian's care, Ian being a mercenary with his company. And basically he says, you stay with the Murray lad who'll look after you, and whatever you do, don't come back to Scotland. So here's Jamie, who is, still, badly injured from the flogging, and, kind of shaky and so forth, and much more emotionally injured because, he knows his father has died and he feels responsible personally for this. And so, he's in really bad shape. He also feels terrible guilt over what he assumes happened to his sister. And, so he's got all this going on in his mind. And so he actually finds it a welcome distraction to be involved with this gang of mercenaries, and engage in the occasional road fight and so forth. But things get more serious. And when they join this group, neither Jamie nor Ian has ever killed anyone, nor, as Ian says one night, have you ever done it? And Jamie says, what, killed anyone? And Ian says, no, lain with a lass. And Jamie says, how would you know, what would you know about it or something? And Ian says, oh, you haven't then. And neither of them has. So at one point they are actually having an argument about whether fornication or killing is a worse sin. And some of those lines from Virgins actually made it into episode 13 of season 1, because I had given the production crew my unwritten, unpublished stuff at that point that they might be able to use. Virgins was among those. So anyway, that's about what it is in Virgins, and we'll see, the development of these two young men, how they, pass through these rituals of manhood, you might say. All right. Okay, this will be the last question, I'm told. This is too bad. I've been enjoying it, talking to myself. I hope you guys have enjoyed it as well. Carol asks, Diana, you devoted such a significant part of your life to writing this phenomenal series. I think you are amazingly talented. Is there something else you'd like to try when the series is concluded? Well, yes, I have a lot of things in mind. I have half of a modern mystery novel written. I have chunks and bits and pieces of the first Master Raymond novel. I think there are maybe 2 or 3 of those, but, all in good time. Things just bubble up for me, and when they do, I write them down. But, yeah, there's plenty of stuff there. So, anyway, thank you for joining me this afternoon, and I hope you've enjoyed it very much. Thank you. Okay, and now I press stop. Yes.